Good evening, everyone. My name is Laura, and I am the Volunteer and Events Coordinator for the Calgary Horticultural Society. Welcome to our talk on growing perennial food plants. This is a Seed to Table series offered in partnership with the City of Calgary, and the focus is on eliminating waste and pollution and conserving resources. It is a shift from a throwaway mindset to one that extends the life cycle of goods, food, and resources through better design, continuous reuse so that nothing goes to waste. The Seed to Table series is a low input growing initiative that goes through each of the steps required in a gardening journey. And the classes and resources in this series will help you to become increasingly self sufficient, save money, as well as reducing waste. And before we get started, I would like to share with everyone the Society's land acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge the enduring and active relationship of Indigenous people with this land, specifically the area in which we inhabit today, also known as the traditional territories of the people of Treaty 7. The Society as an organization is focused on the well-being of the land, and we endeavor to honor Indigenous, Inuit, and Métis rights and relationships with the land and the ability for all to grow, live, work, and play within this territory. Thank you. So, a little bit about the Horticultural Society, if you haven't heard about us. We are a registered charitable nonprofit organization celebrating 118 years of cultivating Calgary's gardening community. Our mission is to encourage gardening for the enhancement of our environment and quality of life, and one way we do this is through sessions like this one. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our instructor for this evening, Joanna Tschudy. Joanna is the Society's Community Development Coordinator and owner of Inhabit Landscape Design, and who thoroughly enjoys combining her education in horticulture and visual arts with the years of industry know-how. Whether it's in person or in the media, Joanna loves sharing her expertise and helping Calgarians use their outdoor spaces to their fullest potential. Welcome, Joanna.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you. Thanks to you for emphasizing years of experience.
You have
I've been at
to.
it a bit. I feel like I got a job when I was a teenager and I never really got out of it. So, not a teenager
Love it.
anymore. Thank you for the introduction. I'll go ahead and share my screen now. Cool. So I've got, first of all, welcome everybody. I'm super happy to have you on a rainy, chilly Monday evening in technically we're still in spring, but we're heading towards summer, so we're getting there. Yeah, it feels good. This year has been like a sort of a stop-start spring, like swinter. Is that what people are sprinter? That's what people are calling it for a while. And now we're um, getting some really warm weather and some good rain. So this is all right in line with what I had hoped for in the garden. And I what's really lovely to see right now is that while I'm waiting for transplanted annual seedlings to come, like to get settled in, and I'm waiting for some seeds to come up, my perennial food plants they are fully leafed out. Many of them have already flowered. I've snapped off rhubarb flowers. I'm watching and waiting for my hascap bushes to turn those flowers into berries, which will happen before the month is up. So they are off and running. They don't really care too much. Of course, they love the rain, but they don't really care too much about this way or that, or cold or warm. They're awake and they're active. So that's really nice. Also, just a quick little background. That was a great introduction from Laura, and I wear a few different hats. I help with community engagement with the society. I've been doing that for a number of years and I love it very much. I get to meet and learn from and share with so many people from all over the world, all over our country, and all over Calgary. And every little nook and cranny of our city is very different. Every community is a little bit different. So it's really lovely to engage and see what are the unique challenges and successes across all these geographies that I get to dip my toes in. It's really actually an honor. I always wanted to do something like this, and here I am doing it. So it feels really good. And aside from that, I also work at a food security center called the Alex. We're a program of the Alex Community Health Center, and our focus is around food systems work, advocating for providing access and education around food security. Also love that work. It humbles me every day, and I learn so much. And again, it's interesting to find my way through navigating these food systems and how they play out in our city, in our rural identity as Southern Albertans, our global identity as Canadians, and then even how does that work right on my own little spot with myself and my family? What does that look like? So I get to go microcosm, macrocosm every day. And if that wasn't enough in my spare time, I also do run my own landscape design business. It's called Inhabit. So I do lots of garden coaching. Mostly I help people with their residential projects, either designing or consulting to help them phase things out and get their projects either in a way where they can contract out the harder bits and or DIY the rest of it. So I'm very good at guiding people on how to do things, and then also gleaning those learnings from community and sharing them all the way around. Gardening, as I mentioned, I've been doing this since I was a teenager. I'm approaching 50, which is hard to believe. So I've been doing this for a number of decades, and I've gone in and out of this work. I've worked in farmers markets, I've worked landscaping, I've worked in horticulture, I've studied botany, plant pathology, ethnobotany, and I love it all. And I find that I get to weave all those things together too in my daily work. I think too that I grew up in a little bit warmer place. We still had honest winters, but northern Michigan is where I come from. I've been here for 23 years now in Canada, but those were the days when I lived back there where the humid summers and the hotter temperatures would allow a little bit more of a lush environment. It felt like to me anyway. So when I moved here, it was a lot of adaptation, getting used to a new environment, new soil, new growing season, and a lot of it felt really tough and challenging. And I failed lots, but I didn't quit. That's my street cred. I just don't quit. Um, and it's gotten me places, and I love to share this knowledge with people. So I'm glad you're tuned in. I'm also looking forward to learning from you all tonight and hearing stories and hearing about your successes and challenges as you've gardened. I love about doing this class in particular is that it's all part of the Seed to Table initiative, which is so near and dear to my heart because I love saving money. I love reducing my footprint, my waste. I love reusing things. I love just being really old school. I always think like, how would grandma do this? And then I use old socks or nylons or old, like Tupperware that is cracked. I use all kinds of things to just make sure that what I'm doing isn't breaking the bank or causing problems down the food chain line. So, yeah. So as I mentioned, I feel like when I settled here in the beginning, it was really tough to get adjusted. But what I've come to realize is that folks in Southern Alberta and especially Calgary, I should say the Chinook zone, which is largely Calgary, are super unique. The gardeners here are like none I've ever met anywhere else. They're like just total diehards. They're optimistic. They're super resourceful. They're very generous and giving. I've had total strangers help me with garden projects, and it encourages me to jump in and do the same and encourage that community spirit. It's not just Chinooks, it's hail, it's jackrabbits, it's deer, it's all kinds of stuff that sort of sweep through our area and really challenge us to, like, if you say, I want to be a gardener or I want to grow this thing, then it's almost like immediate, like a lightning strike. The universe is like, oh, do you? So we have to really stick by our guns. And I've just met so many determined gardeners here. There's just a different feel to hanging out with gardeners here than anywhere else I've ever been. They are just a really hardy bunch of people. So the more you can hang out with Calgary gardeners, the better your skills will be. That's what I've noticed. I just kind of feel like even by osmosis, I've learned a lot and kind of soaked in that aura of just grit that I feel when I'm with folks either at a horticultural society event or at different community engagements, whether it's giving a talk or teaching a design class or even just meeting people in their own gardens, working with community gardeners. It's that kind of true grit that the folks in the foothills / prairies have. And one thing that I have seen happen over time, when I first moved here in the sort of early to mid 2000s, there was a lot of like traditional community gardens that this is where we grow our vegetables. And then, there weren't a lot of flowering things happening. There wasn't a lot of shrubs or trees planted. It was just sort of these raised boxes in the middle of a field or next to a community association building. And then I would go to people's houses and they would have sort of a miniature version of that. They'd say, this is where I grow vegetables. It's usually a wooden raised bed. And I know why, because of all the things I just mentioned of why it's hard to garden here. We have a short, cool season. Our soil is really often compacted clay, very alkaline. So if you can put in a raised bed, you've got immediate control of what soil you're growing in. They might warm up and keep their heat longer than an in-ground bed. You can control the moisture in that bed a lot easier. So yeah, so there's reasons for it. I get it. There's advantages, but then often they're just kept separate. They're like, here I grow flowers and shrubs and trees, and there I grow my vegetables, and they're separate. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm going to say right off the top that that's totally fine. It's just that I thought that's how it had to be. I never really questioned that, except to remember back to my grandmother had a pretty traditional garden in that way. Like, here, this is a veggie patch and this is where we grow flowers. But my mom was a little bit more a child of the 60s, and she went ahead and started to blend things a lot, and a lot of those beautiful flowers came through in the annual vegetable garden as well. So we'd see, of course you could think marigolds. That's an easy connection. Sort of a hybrid plant that lives in both worlds. But then there's sunflowers and there's cosmos. And then pretty soon there were perennial flowers in our vegetable garden area. And a lot of people were like, why would you have that in there? You're taking away room for growing food. And my mom's reasoning was always that she was bringing in the pollinators. And if the pollinators were in the garden or knew to keep coming back to the garden because there's habitat and food for them in these perennial flowers, then they would be visiting the squash blossoms and all the other things that we needed pollinated to make food. So she stood by that. And I thought, well, okay, that's just something my mom did. But I'm starting to see that more and more over the years here in Calgary, that people are blending and they're recognizing the strength that can come from that blending. But yeah, and again, there's nothing wrong if you want to keep them separate. Often you'll see front yards are the space for kind of showing off or making something pretty for the neighborhood to look at that might increase your curb appeal. It's really fun to landscape and play with sort of painting with like plants, creating layers and different textures and colors and having something interesting blooming all the time. But I would challenge you, if you've got open spots, to start plugging things in that would do well in your front yard. Maybe it could be garlic, or maybe it could be, if you're really holding space for something and your perennial plants will eventually get big enough to fill it in, but you have this big open area, why not plant a pumpkin or zucchini or something that could really sprawl and take up that space and be interesting and maybe even give you a little bit of food. So yeah, we're starting to see some blending happening. I also do see yards where there's no grass, there's no landscaping, and the whole thing is pumpkins. So we can strike a balance either way, but yeah, you have to kind of determine, what are you in it for? And the more you diversify that answer, the more reason there is to incorporate perennial food plants in your landscape and potentially perennial ornamental plants in your veggiescapes, I guess I would call it. So you can have it all. It just depends really why you're gardening. So I encourage people always to listen to your gut. If your gut tells you, I want to, like literally, I want to eat carrots and beans all summer long and have some cherry tomatoes here and there, then that's what you should focus on. And maybe you do that in a planter pot with your tumbling tomatoes, or maybe you've got beans growing up some of your ornamental landscape plants. But there's ways to blend. We'll get into that. But start asking what you want out of your garden. And so quite often when we think of our perennial food plants, they are big givers. They're giving us stuff all the time. Even if we don't harvest anything from them at the end of the season, they're giving us a lot of material to put in our compost pile, if nothing else. And sometimes there's losses in your season and you have to sort of go, well, all the pumpkins got hail damaged or the squirrels bit into every single one of them, but I've got a lot of material for the compost pile. So there's always something to glean. There's always a gift from the garden. But have a look at what the plants are that you're interested in. Again, listen to your gut too. Maybe you're tuning into increased awareness about planting native plants or increasing biodiversity, increasing habitat for native pollinators or migratory songbirds. Whatever your jam is, there's probably a garden layout that will suit it best. And if you say, well, I want to attract songbirds, but I also want to grow like, you know, killer garlic or, we eat a lot of lettuce or something, you can do both. So I would say just start to blur the lines a little bit and also expand your comfort zone. We can break some of these traditions when we start to question them. Do we have to plant our vegetables in a straight row in a raised box? Maybe not. Maybe they can go in planters or they can go out front between shrubs. If the exposure and the site is conducive to the growing habits of that plant, try it. Just see. So be experimental. I think that vegetables are often very pretty. Think of rainbow chard. I love the way garlic flowers twist and curl. Asparagus. Holy cow, asparagus is like, if you don't catch it in time and you let some of the stalks go up and start to leaf out, it is so beautiful and feathery and architectural. It's to me, it's like the best of all worlds. The food that these plants offer can be not just for us. They're offering food for, as I mentioned, pollinators. They're providing a steady source of nectar. They're providing a steady source of protection and habitat as well, even if that's just a shady leaf to hide under and nibble on. Of course, we're not trying to invite in animals that are going to eat all of our plants down to nubs, but I don't really want to invite deer and rabbits into my property, but so maybe I'd plant the things that I know they like where they can't get them in the backyard, and the things that I know they'll leave alone can go out in the more exposed areas like a front or a side yard. And then too, don't forget that often many of our, like when I think of food, it's so broad. It's not just what I put in my mouth to satisfy my stomach. It's beyond the fuel of just our digestive system. To me, food often is pleasing to the eye. It's something I can grow to make a tea garden from. Maybe it's medicines that I'm picking that I will, anise hyssop is a favorite plant of mine because I can make tea with it. The bees and butterflies absolutely love it. It's super easy to grow. And then it's like the best cough medicine you could ever make if you just mix the tea with a little honey. To me, I find that more soothing on a sore throat that I usually get in the fall and winter than any other over-the-counter medicine or like throat lozenge. And I can plant that plant once and have it everywhere if I wanted it. So yeah, so that's a beautiful thing about these plants. And then also, they can be really great mulches. So something like a strawberry patch can be a living mulch. It can act like a good shade and water retention for your garden. Also, it gives you food. They're low growing. They're that great sort of soil level in a guild. Often, here's comfrey. This is a beautiful plant. Again, it's more of a medicinal plant, but it's also food for other non-human visitors to your garden. So lots of pollinators love this plant. There is a non-spreading type of comfrey. I would encourage you to find that one. Or if you get the generic comfrey plant, you should plant it where you'll never want anything but comfrey because it does root down really heavily. And those roots are actually a big part of the medicine that this plant offers. And then don't forget too, often food feeds us through tradition and heritage and culture. So it's not necessarily it could be something you eat, but it could also be something that you use in ceremony or offerings or to gift or to just have available in your garden space. So This is some tobacco that I grew from seed next to carrots, of all things. I was experimenting big time that year. There's a beehive behind it all. But yeah, that tobacco, I didn't smoke it. I grew that first of all to see if I could. And then sure enough, I could. It turned out really well. And that tobacco I have used since as a gift, if I'm approaching an elder. And so it's nice to have other cultures have fantastic ways of honoring their plant relatives and bringing them into their own human experience. So don't discount culture. The other piece about these edible food plants that come along to us or that we invite into our property is that they are often, to me anyway, I find them much easier to deal with. They don't require a lot of my attention. As I've said throughout so far, I'm not the only one benefiting from them. They are up and at it much earlier than any of the other plants that I have introduced into my garden. And I would even count in plants that are self-seeding. They might not have year-round roots here, but they'll drop seed and that seed can overwinter and come up on its own again the next year. Often a lot of our perennial food plants, they're just such great teachers. They show you where they need to be. So let's say I've planted asparagus in my front yard and it's just disappearing and I don't know what's going on. And I've consulted all the books and I've called, my local designer over and they're giving me some good garden coaching. And sure enough, that's what the deer and rabbits love to chew on. So then I move it to my backyard and maybe I bring out the onions to the front yard, or I bring out something that I know, like raspberries. Maybe those won't get eaten down quite as much on the outside of the fence. So we can use some of our perennial food plants or even our ornamental but like still medicinal or tea grade plants to deter some pestier animals. And then a lot of our plants, like that comfrey I just showed, they're in one place and they're going to stay there. And they're just like us. They have kind of like their favorite foods or their diet that they like from the soil. So they're constantly drawing up different chemistry from the soil, different elements, but they're also drawing in different biology. So the life that's active in the soil is interfaces with different plants in different ways. So just like us, if we eat a certain diet and we're in one place, this is our home and our community, we're going to keep going to the same restaurants or getting the same things from the grocery store. The plants are not that different. They're always kind of like mining or accessing different nutrients and different things within the soil. So they call that bioaccumulation. So sometimes they can be used to actually alter your soil or indicate what's in your soil. And that's something that I love learning more and more about. I'm not an expert on that, but I do notice that certain plants do better in some places than other places. And I often wonder about how the soil might be different from place to place and what that plant is telling me. And I never get straight, fast, magic bullet answers ever. And again, that's like why I love gardening. I have to piece it together. I have to sleuth around the gardens and figure it out and do some research. But for the most part, perennial food plants keep their roots intact because their survival depends on it. And so they are anchoring down the soil. They have these long-standing relationships within the soil. And so ultimately they are keeping a good structure to our soil. They are enhancing the soil. They do need fertilization every now and then, but that's easy enough, especially if you compost. Here's a great example of a self-seeding plant. It's called Phacelia. This is often planted as understory in orchards, especially in BC. But this, I plant it under my asparagus because I treat my asparagus kind of like a tree in a fruit guild, which I'll get into a diagram of that later as well. If you're like, what are these things she's saying? I'll explain. But Phacelia is, what does it do? Its number one like superpower is that it brings in the pollinators. I mean, look at the flower. I would land on that if I could. It's just inviting those ultraviolet colors and the stamen that are sticking up, full of nectar and pollen. That would be such a beautiful landing pad if you were a bee. And this is not something that keeps its roots every year, but it does drop enough seed. And if you don't clean up your garden too fast, that seed will sprout. And I get this every year. So it's a real benefit to my garden. And then we also have borage, which is another beautiful self-seeding plant. I like borage because it doesn't do much until it gets everything it wants. So the heat has to be right, the sunlight has to be right, and the water level has to be right. I've had borage seeds sit dormant under my eaves, south facing. The heat and the sunlight is there, but the water isn't because I don't water under my eaves too much. So it's really dry. But there's been times where I have watered there and up pop these borage plants that I didn't plant them there. They just came out of nowhere. They weren't there 2 or 3 years beforehand, but then there they are. And so as soon as they get water, they're up. So they do spread around, but they behave. They're not aggressive. And you can eat them. The flowers taste like cucumbers. Obviously, the honeybees and the pollinators absolutely love them. They're fuzzy. They're really cool. They're cool if you just even sprinkle those flowers in ice cubes or waters. It kind of elevates your drink. It's sort of a pretty flower to have around. And as I mentioned, it's not just about us. You know, we always think of insects, or at least I think of insects first. So I kind of go like smallest to largest. But I noticed once I started keeping things around for birds to pull fluff off of or to hide under. These are my yearly Haskap berry pickers. They're here and they're fledging and they're ready to go. So whatever berries I don't get, they'll come along and help me pick them. And it's really cool for my family to see these robins returning every year and feeling safe and comfortable and nourished in our property. I love that. And then often, you know, garlic, I wouldn't call it a perennial, but it's definitely something that if you forget to pull garlic cloves out of the ground in the fall or end of summer, they're going to be there next year and they're going to keep doing their garlicky thing. They're a bulb. So they shoot up these cool flowers, which are called garlic scapes, and you can eat those just like garlic. You chop them up, you stir fry them, freeze them, process them, put them in soups. Whatever you do with garlic, you can do the same thing with their flowers. And as you do that, you are encouraging, as you cut the flowers off and eat them, that's the first harvest. You get a full second harvest later. Once those flowers are gone, all that energy goes down to the bulbs and they get bigger and juicier and more awesome for when you pick the garlic for the whole reason you grew it to begin with, which is the root. But they're really cool. Animals don't eat them too much. If you've never gardened before and you're thinking of planting any kind of vegetable, I would highly encourage you to plant hardy garlic. The kind I like a lot is called Red Russian, and I source it from a garden center. I've been gifted a lot of Red Russian, and so I always make enough. I plant enough to eat, and I plant enough to half goes to eating and half goes to replanting so that I always have a good supply of garlic. And then that soil enhancer, here you can just, hopefully you can see this, there's these little white nodes on these roots here. This is a fava bean. I know that's not a perennial food plant, but I do plant these into my perennial garden. And so they're planted in between shrubs and perennials alike because they're big seeds, but they can come up and they're skinny enough. And when they are doing their thing, because they're a legume, they're pulling oxygen from the air and it's interfacing again that party in the root zone. They're trading. There's this big commodity trafficking going on. They're trading things back and forth. So the plant is trading off nitrogen and it's getting the things it needs to be healthy. And lo and behold, my perennial plants around it love the nitrogen. They're big, fast growers. They have big, strong leaves, and they're getting a lot of nitrogen, I believe, from these bean plants that I just, all I do is just shove seeds in and I keep them watered here and there. But they do this generous thing all summer. And then again, I can cut the tops, leave the roots in the ground and cut the tops and either chop them up and have mulch right there to help winterize the garden, or I can take them to the compost pile and feed them into the pile that way. If you've seen me talk before, you've probably seen my front yard. I do this quite a bit, but I like to just show you the evolution that can happen in a season. So this is my front yard. This is, let's see, that little guy in the back is my son, who is now 18, and he's a super tall guy. So I think he was about 5. So yeah, 13 years ago. the journey began. This is what we moved into. Lots of rock work that was sort of failing and tumbling off and not stacked properly. And then a spruce tree and a bunch of quackgrass. So what do you do with that? But I was excited to not own a lawnmower. So I took some of the rocks down a bit and I terraced that bed up because I wanted to slow down the water and also have a little bit more interesting sort of layering in my garden just with the hardscape. So I worked back some of that rock work. In the meantime, I dug out all that quackgrass and kept the tree where it was because they're immovable. Really thought about cutting it down. I'm glad I didn't have the money to do that because I love that tree now. It provides so much shade for our house. Yeah, so really I started thinking about water. This is the number one thing for any landscape or garden project you have is water. You're very, very limited if you don't have a source of water. And if you do have a source of water, because it comes off of your roof or out of a hose or into a rain barrel or through a swale, like a trough that you've dug into the ground, runoff from snowmelt, rainwater, whatever it might be, if that's your source of water, you really need to caretake that more than anything in your yard. So I wanted to stop all that water from hitting the grass and just filtering in for the tree or running off the edge of the rock wall, which it was doing. So I started to slow it down and, of course, make more room for garden beds. And then the first year, that looks like red mulch. It's not, it's just a bad photo. I just got a bunch of plants on discount. My neighbors gave me some plants. It was really sparse. I was like, man, when is this going to take off? But Calgary, if it can be done in 3 years, that's kind of magical. It's more like 3 to 5 to maybe even 7. But the first year, plants just sleep. They look like they're doing nothing, and we get frustrated, and then we plant more plants, which is a mistake. You have to be patient because they're just trying to decide where the heck they are. They've been in a pot, they've been kicked around a nursery, on a truck, in the back of somebody's car, dug out of somebody's yard, and now they're adjusting to a whole new site. So they're just acclimating. So that's sleep the first year. And then if everything goes well and they're in the right spot and the stars align, you'll get creep the next year, which usually looks like 2 to 3 years, really. And creeping is, again, unseen by us. These are things that happen underground. So this is the root system saying, yep, I know where I am. I'm getting what I need. I'm going to go adventuring now. So the roots start to go out a little bit. They start to find the nutrients and water that it needs because you thought about that from the beginning. And then the third year is leap. So if it's acclimated and the roots are starting to find what they need, the above ground portion of that plant starts to really take off. And this is kind of what it can end up looking like. This is an older picture. I should update this, but you can see I've got lots of ornamentals. The first year I planted this, when it looked more like that, I planted a lot of pumpkins to just fill that space, and they were trailing down the wall and out into the sidewalk. So I kept moving them, and my neighbors would come out, and we were new. So we ended up meeting a lot of neighbors just because of pumpkin plants, which was great. All the neighborhood kids got pumpkins that year. But in the background, I've got haskaps. I had planted a goji berry bush. That was a big teacher for me because it was a spreading type. So I learned very quickly that that thing did not sleep or creep for too long. It was up and moving fast, and it was spreading everywhere. So I had to relocate that one. But yeah, I started to dabble with berry bushes and flowers, and then that was fun and easy. So I started to put more berry bushes in along the side of our fence, and I started to bring kale and rainbow chard and garlic out into the front yard. One year I planted turnips because the ground after a few years felt really compacted. And that spruce tree, as we all know, was really sucking the life out of the whole yard. So I have planted many beans, lots of different kinds of legumes, bush beans, heirloom bush beans, chickpeas, cowpeas or the fava beans, soybeans, all kinds of things that I could just sort of do to give back to the soil, not really counting on a big bean harvest, but that's the journey of my front yard. The top part, sort of looking down, is a patio. It looked so nice and clean the first year. That's a lot of piles that I moved, and my son used his Tonka truck to help me. I got really fit that year. It was great. But yeah, we get hail, things get pelted. We've since dug out a lot more of the grass on the other side of our walkway and made a rock garden. But it just goes to show that when you plant something out and it's very diverse, it can handle things like hailstorms. It can handle some browsing, some grazing from animals that pass through. We are a soccer field and 1 block away from Fish Creek Park. No fences out front, so the animals come in all the time. I find traces of them everywhere. They help me fertilize. We've had mallards, rabbits, cottontail and jackrabbits. We've had partridges, pheasants. We've had foxes, coyotes. We've had all kinds of animals in our front yard. One year we had deer footprints, deer track in the front yard that were like bigger than my stretched out hand. So either a big buck or I don't know, Rudolph came through the yard that winter, but we've started to attract so many animals just because I think they have a place to hide out and maybe they're curious to eat something, but most stuff is still standing. So how do you do it at your place? I just wanted to show you how we did our front yard. The backyard is a whole other story. I've got photos of that as well. That's a little bit more intensive for the vegetable growing, but we have these buffer zones where we've filled in areas that were sort of blank slates. We've built beds. We've worked the soil in the ground. We've made perimeter plantings all the way around, and that's where we tuck some of these plants in. So amongst, like in this photo, you can see a lot of annuals here. There's marigolds, there's salvia, there's kale, but then you've got the ornamental grasses, you've got nasturtiums, you've got the rudbeckia there. So you can start to blend. You're just blending, you're understanding what you can eat and what you can't eat. Some of that food is for other creatures, not human, for the bees. There's no reason that you can't have little edges and borders of edible foods. This is rainbow chard. I think it's gorgeous. If I'm struggling with leaf miner in my raised beds, why don't I try to put it out front? Or why don't I try to line one of my in-ground beds with chard or with kale, frilly kale, or even with lettuce? I've had great success that way. And I kind of throw off, it's like crop rotation. It is crop rotation. I throw off those pests that are hanging out in the soil of my raised bed, giving me grief, because they're not even down where I put these seeds. Nobody's expecting me to do this, including myself. So I just do it anyway. And then the results, it might just be for 1 year. I might go back to doing marigolds or something else next year. But for 1 year, I've broken that cycle. And so you always have to keep the pests at bay as best you can. And crop rotation is one way to do it. You start small. You don't need to do big plantings. Maybe you're not convinced by me or this presentation or the whole idea of a food forest or edible food plants, but try it in your planters. Try it in a window box. In this, we see there's edible kale right here. There's the dinosaur kale and then the purple frilly kale in the back. You can eat that calendula, the sort of taller peach blossom colored flower, and then the rest are annuals. And they're drawing in pollinators, but you can walk by. You don't have to cut that kale down at the stem. You can just pull leaves off the base. So while the purple flowers, while they're sort of filling out, you can pull leaves off the bottom of the stem. So give it a try in small ways. See how you feel about it. See if you'd like to do more. And then you haven't invested much, so you won't lose much if you're not into it. This again is an old picture. You can barely see it. There's an ash tree kind of in the middle of this bed, a pyramidal mountain ash actually, because I wanted to feed the Bohemian waxwings. I noticed down the street that they always come in the springtime really early to my neighbor's mountain ash tree. And I love those birds. They remind me of home. They definitely tell me that spring is here. Even if we get a couple more blizzards, spring is here because I see them. They come in flocks. They're such, I don't know, they're such beautiful, sleek little gray birds with these flashes of reds and yellows in their feathers. And so I thought, I want to invite them to our yard. But we don't have the room for a showy mountain ash tree. So I looked it up and I settled on a pyramidal mountain ash because it'll give us the right canopy size for that small bed, which isn't too far from the north face of our house. And in the meantime, like that's a pretty full bed. There is 2 trees. There's an apple tree and an ash tree and 2 shrubs in there, but it's really full. And so what I did was I filled in all that space with garlic. You might get by the end of this that I really love garlic. And then strawberries, because sometimes we sit on this rock wall and we hang out there, and it's a nice shady spot in the middle of the day when the house is shading everything. So we can sit there and pick strawberries. We can reach right in from the rock wall. And that garlic and all those annual veggies are holding space while my Annabelle hydrangea and my tiger eyes sumac fill in. And once they do, I don't have to plant garlic there anymore. So sometimes our food, our annual foods are placeholders, and sometimes they're the main attraction. And then sometimes we have these perennial foods that are holding the space forever and ever. On the bottom left here, there's sort of a lime green leaf coming up a trellis, and that is my hardy kiwi. That's the female. And I actually, for the first time ever, got kiwi last year. The vine has been in the ground about 5 years. I have a male kiwi on the other side of the yard. So they cross pollinate, and they look like oval shaped long, skinny little things growing on there. I thought, geez, are those actually the kiwi? And I cut one open, and they're like the size of the end of my pinky. And they were the sweetest thing I've ever eaten in my whole life out of the garden here in Calgary. They tasted like Skittles. They were so, so good. So I think of vertical spaces as well. And that kiwi vine will be there as long as that plant is alive. So I'll just have to keep trellising it and kind of wrangling it back in, because kiwis can be kind of rangy. But in the meantime, I've got the garlic, I've got poppy seeds growing, I've got spinach. I have a self-seeding spinach called Oric. All kinds of stuff kind of mixed and mashed in there until the shrubs and the vines and the tree get bigger, which they are starting to now. And so I can cut back on some of that. Here's the same bed from the view from the far north, looking back. So under this apple tree, there are ostrich fern, which are a beautiful shade-loving native plant. If you get them early enough, you can eat the fiddleheads before they uncurl. They're delicious, cleaned up, sauteed in butter with salt and pepper. Just keep it really simple. Even better if you can find some wild edible foraged mushrooms, or if you grow your own. Just make sure that they're edible. But fiddleheads and mushrooms, nothing brings a spring feeling more than that. So they're delicious. And if you don't want to eat the fiddleheads, you just want to let the ferns unfurl. They're beautiful. They fill in this whole space in the understory of my apple tree, and they are like a green mulch as well. And they're native, so they really don't need a lot of help from me. That's just sort of a view. Whoops, that's sort of a view. And this is another big boulder that we can sit on there and kind of just enjoy. The apple tree has now doubled in size from this picture, and it's casting a lot of shade now, which is great because the ferns, I knew the ferns would need that. So the first couple years they were getting a little bit too much sun, but now they're in full shade and they're loving it. So a thing to think about when you're doing edible landscaping is the layers. Think of covering the ground and then what comes above that and above that and above that. Usually we can get like 4 or 5 layers, and then we know that no, we're not wasting any vertical space. We're even considering vines. We know that the trees have a skirt of shrubs around them or taller perennials. The perennials are there to hold space. And then there's even perennial ground cover and mushrooms, if you get into that, that you can start to grow. There's that phacelia at the base of my asparagus. This is what it looks like early, early spring. Like on our first warm spring days, the asparagus almost always bolts. I can barely catch it. It never makes it into the kitchen. I just eat it fresh from the garden. I just snap off some heads and eat them there. Like so much of my garden, cherry tomatoes, they never get inside. They're just candy while I'm gardening. But this phacelia eventually fills in this hole. All of that dirt is covered with the phacelia. So it's bringing in pollinators. It's shading the roots of the asparagus. It's giving me lots to put into the compost pile or just chop and leave right there. And in fact, mostly I don't touch it until just before it starts to come up in the spring. So I've mentioned a guild a couple times, so a fruit tree guild. When I was talking about these layers, this is what I mean. So this is from the Edmonton Permaculture Guild. And it's just sort of this cross section. You don't need to have this in every bed. And like the picture I just showed you, the asparagus and the phacelia and some strawberries made it in there. That's kind of a guild in itself. It doesn't have to be a fruit tree. It doesn't have to be full of fruit bushes. It just has to make sense in terms that you have considered it interacting with the soil either through a root vegetable, something that will give you edible roots, or use the roots to break up soil, or even those bean plants. Those roots are actively giving nitrogen into the soil from the atmosphere. So consider the root zone always. And then what's the next layer? It would be like the frosting on top of. So it'd be a green mulch. It could be culinary thyme. It could be some sort of low growing ground cover like strawberries. And then you're going up in layers. So yeah, it's nothing new. I like to give props to permaculture folks because they have really pushed this idea of planting a plant family. So there isn't just a tree standing by itself with a bunch of mulch around it or a lawn. There's this whole grouping of plants that look after one another. And in the end, you tend them and they give you stuff. It's a pretty good arrangement. Not a lot of tinkering needed, but it's not a super high production space. So if you're like looking for a production garden, this is like what I would do in the buffer zones. This is what I would do, if I was going to plant perennial herbs, for example, I'd keep them close to the kitchen door because I'm going to use them frequently and I want to be pinching them back and keeping them, from flowering and going to seed. I want the leaf, right? Or maybe I do want the flowers. If I want a tea garden, I'm going to put that someplace where I know that all those plants can go to flower and I can collect them and it won't destroy the view out the kitchen window or make the neighbors wonder what I'm doing. So you have to find the right plant for the right place. But permaculture is great. It's got a lot of teaching resources. There's a lot of applicable principles beyond gardening, just into every other aspect of our life that I like. But permaculture ultimately to me is based on traditional indigenous land stewardship, which I find doesn't get as much recognition or respect. So I just want to give a nod to all of the things that have shaped this more modern notion of how we take care of soil ultimately and the land and how we connect back to it and get food. And so these traditional land stewardships, it wasn't like plant this thing and then live by it forever and ever. Like we do now, we live in our homes and we don't really travel around. Most of us don't have second, third, fourth, fifth homes. We aren't migrating here and there. We don't have a huge forest to look after. So this is like a micro version of what indigenous growers would have done long ago. They're looking after areas of a forest, or they're looking after the buffer zone where a field meets a forest. Maybe they're planting things and they're coming back a year later and seeing what's growing and cultivating that. Maybe they're introducing seeds that have been traded. So there's a whole rich mishmash of history and tradition there that permaculture is based on. So just giving that little nod there as much as I can. And those land stewardship practices, it still teach us so much today. And they're all about seed to table. We're talking about circular economy stuff. These stewardship practices are at the heart of that. There were no hoses, there was no tap water. There was only what the sky gave everybody, and that was rainwater, snowmelt. Maybe it was in a riparian area, but folks that grew long ago had to really know what the environment was doing and how they could interact with it in a way that would encourage food growth. And then they knew what to do with that food and how to store it and travel with it and trade it and use it in other ways to not only be edible, but medicinal and culturally significant as well. So this is a crosscut of what a fruit guild could look like in a city space or in a larger space as well. But it just shows that every layer is considered and every layer is part of the family. It's all related and interconnected. And for that reason, it makes it that much stronger. There's water being held in, there's shade where it's needed, there's sun where it's needed. You can still step in there and tend things and pick things and harvest things as well. I just wanted to share some lists. So maybe you can take a screenshot. There's 2 more slides that show some plants named out. Here's another picture of my backyard. So yes, I do grow in raised beds. I often reconsider the raised beds. Like every year I think, is this the year I'm going to take them all down and just go right down to the ground with sort of mounded beds? I haven't done it yet because it was a lot of work to build those beds out of an old cedar deck that we took apart. and they're still functioning quite well. So I'll leave them where they're at. But even in my vegetable bed, I've got red creeping thyme along the ground. That's keeping weeds from growing. I can walk on it. It brings in tons and tons of pollinators once it flowers. And then I've got self-seeding dill. I've got sunflowers. I've got all kinds of things that come back year after year. And if I don't want it where it is, I just pull it and make room for more intensive annual plantings. But this list shows a lot of plants that you can plant once, and if you let them go to flower and seed and even kind of knock them around a little bit or bury them with mulch, they will come back next year, no problem. Or you can save seeds from them. It's not hard to save seeds from turnips or peppers or radishes, for example. Some of these, like cherry tomatoes, some of those you do need to collect and take inside, preserve the seed, and then they're easier to plant outside. But for the most part, you can get a lot of these seeds to kind of do their own thing outside. Here is a list, and this is not exhaustive, but this is, and some of them, again, you need to know these plants. For example, chamomile, that will spread everywhere if you're not careful. So I'm not, I don't want you to read this list and say, oh, one of each. Think about what, also, like, what does she mean eating daylilies? Yes, some of these things are edible. So maybe you planted daylilies just because they're beautiful. But then you can also eat parts of daylilies. You can eat the flowers. You can eat some of the roots. You can eat strawberry leaves. Did you know that? You can make tea with these. So there's a lot of different parts of the plants that are edible. So do a little research. Go back to listening to your gut. What do I actually eat? What does my family eat? What do I like? And then give it a try. And if you don't, these are all common names, by the way. So if you need Latin names, you'll have to look these up or circle back and ask us at the Hort Society or ask me. But a lot of these are the gifts that keep on giving. So you invest in them once, and often these are very easily dug out of somebody else's patch. So as long as you have permission or they're gifted to you, I know most people would part with some horseradish or rhubarb or lovage. Those are easy ones to share. And a lot of these, though, be careful. Some of them can spread. Stinging nettles can actually hurt if you touch them. So get to know them, get to know all the different facets of these plants and why you might want to grow them. Try them. Get all of your senses involved in these plants if you can. If you do a lot of pickling and you like spicy things, horseradish is your jam. If you like just spices and herbs, then tarragon, oregano, thyme, those are great. Catnip spreads everywhere, but your cat might love that. So might all the other neighborhood cats. So, but it's also a great tea. It helps with sleep and fever reduction and all kinds of things. Edible trees and shrubs. Again, not exhaustive, but these are some of my favorite ones. I had it going over these, and I feel like I've missed a couple things in here, but for the most part, these have the ones that I like on here a lot. Yeah. Oh, somebody's asked me before, how come blueberries aren't on there? And you could put blueberries on there yourself. I just refuse to because I've never had good luck with blueberries. They survive, but I've never seen them thrive. And I just can't. Growing up in Michigan and seeing bogs full of blueberries with like crabapple sized blueberries on them, um, nothing here compares to that. So I know it's a different place, but if you want something like a blueberry, I would actually plant haskaps. It just seems like a much easier, hardier thing, and they're the first fruit we get. They're even ripe before strawberries. And yeah, and so that is my presentation. Um, please stay in touch. I've got my website there. Again, I work with the Hort Society, and I'd love to connect if you work in a community space. It would be lovely to get together that way. And
Thank
we'll
you,
jump into some
Joanna.
Q&A. Yeah.
Yes, there are a few questions. Sharon has a question about tobacco and heard that tobacco tea works great as a spray to get rid of aphids. Is this
Mm.
true?
Wow, I like that. I've not tried it. I guess I've never used it in that way. I would say the tobacco that I've grown was called Midawaywan tobacco. It was gifted to me, and it was grown in Ontario before that I knew of. And for me, when I picked it, like the leaf is really fuzzy and kind of sticky, like it's weed seeds that are kind of windborne, like dandelion fluff would get stuck to it. They're like quite sticky. And I felt like my hands were really goopy and sticky after I picked them. I even kind of felt like like I just drank a bunch of coffee. Like I'm not a smoker, so I was like, maybe I'm like absorbing some nicotine fresh. I don't know. So I wouldn't be surprised if it has some qualities in that way. I will say one leaf I do have good experience with doing pest control would be rhubarb leaves. So I always feel like if you grow rhubarb and you pick and eat the stem, the leaves are so big. Like I often will just drop them where they are and mulch around the plant. If I've got weed issues, competition in there. And then we always hear, don't eat the leaves, they're very poisonous. That's true. They have high oxalic acid, but I always think like, what do we do with the discard parts of our harvest? And so you can make a simple tea, just infuse the leaves with warm water, like off the boil, just off the boil, let them steep. And then you can strain off that liquid and use that to spray for little insects like aphids. I would encourage you before you create sprays and start tinkering to just watch the aphids and just it's kind of against our nature, but just be patient and give them a couple weeks. And I know people are like, what? But you might lose some stuff in your garden, like some, you might lose or get your dill might be covered in aphids, for example. But I guarantee you, if you can start in that time, busy yourself with identifying the larvae of things like ladybugs, I bet you'll start to see those animals come along and correct the issue of the aphids without you ever needing to do anything. So before we interject, it's really fun to make tinctures and concoctions and learn about what to do with our waste parts of our plants, but also Mother Nature probably has an answer coming. We just have to be patient for it. So, but that's a great question about the tobacco. I have not used it in any type of control before.
So tobacco, does it do better in
Yes.
sun or shade?
I have grown my tobacco mostly in full sun. Yeah, it does better in that situation. And maybe Tirza was also asking about Phacelia. That's also full sun. I did mention that it grows often. Folks who do orchard work, like in BC, will underplant with Phacelia, and it does grow okay in shade, but it brings in the pollinators like crazy if you have it in full sun.
It's also known as purple tansy. So some people
Mhm.
might see that. From Sharon, if you plant foods out front where animals can eat them, would that make them curious to get into your back garden? I've had issues with cottontails eating my plant starts.
Yes, Sharon, I'm feeling you this year. I looked out of our back window into the backyard, which is um like I just told you, I'm all about community engagement and I love working with people, but my backyard is like a fortress. If I have not invited you into it, you probably won't get in there. But there were two cottontail rabbits in my backyard, and I was like, how? How did they get in there? So I went around and found all my gaps and tried to fill them in with, little bits of wood and rocks and stuff. And they're still in there somewhere also eating my seedlings. I don't know. This is the year for cottontail rabbits.
Yes, my
They're
yard
not a
too.
domesticated rabbit that got out. They're not jackrabbits. They're actual cottontails. So if you have them in your front, if you're feeding things potentially in your front yard or enticing with new plantings, yes, animals will come along and be curious, but if you give them a reasonable enough obstacle, like a gate with a fence, that doesn't have too much of a gap for them to get under or around, they should leave things alone because you've got stuff out front. I haven't had too many things come into our backyard. It is pretty airtight, but they things could crawl under my gate in the front if they really wanted to. Um, Maybe that's how the rabbits are coming and going. I'm not sure, but every year I see something different. Like we never used to get I never had a bird bath before. And the first day I put my bird bath out, there was a hawk in the bird bath. And I was like, well, okay. Somebody found us. And then after that, now we have all kinds of birds in our yard that we never saw before. We have crossbills and yellow finches and the nuthatch, which is still banging on the side of our house. But so things can be good, and it's just like, oh, you always want diversity, but then you're like, wait, nuthatches like to dig into your siding. So understand that. Or like downy woodpeckers love to peck at your chimney when you're trying to sleep at 5 in the morning, whatever it is, right? So um, you make new friends, and then either you accept their idiosyncrasies or you don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Question from Monica. Will plants self-seed even if you have mulch in your beds?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say depends on the mulch and depends on the seeds. So borage, for example, that'll nestle right down into mulch of any size. And again, it just kind of waits there till it's getting consistently watered and then it'll grow. Um, I've had plants start out of my compost pile before it was finished, which is like basically a mulch pile. Yeah, poppy seeds come up wherever, no matter if I like toss the mulch somewhere else, then there's another patch of poppies over that way. So I guess it depends on a few things. It depends on the diameter of your mulch, so how much it mats down and protects those seeds over winter. Like it's basically insulating the seeds, which so it can be a good thing. Um, and then if the seeds work down far enough, do they have enough strength and what they need, sunlight, heat, and water to get through the mulch? And then what kind of winter did we get? So if the winter's really, really tough and harsh, really like not a lot of snowpack, lots of desiccating, blowing cold wind, most seeds will struggle. But if they're buried under snow and we don't get too many Chinooks, it's going to be promising. So the answer is yes and no. It's hard to say.
Fantastic. Question from Sharon again. Can you please talk about managing an asparagus patch? My plants are in their fourth year, so we ate some of them this year. Is it cut and come again plant here in Calgary?
Yeah, so they always say to give your asparagus 3 years minimum to get established. And that's just to be sure that when you have the crowns coming through, you've got like, I would never cut more than half of what I've got coming up because that's your future harvest. So they're perennial. So if you cut them off at the stem, you're nixing that one. So each one will grow into a new plant. Next year will grow into more, ideally, but at least one more. So, for example, I planted 4 bare root asparagus plants like 13 years ago. And last year was my biggest haul, I think, because of the rain that we had most of the summer. I was picking it and grilling it and bringing it in the house and eating it fresh. And this year I got like 3 little stems. And
Oh,
it's mostly because I just wasn't on it quick enough, but I would never pick and eat more than half of what's coming up. So there might be years where you just don't pick any, you just let it go. It might be like a hot, dry spring, just let it go. If you mulch really well in the fall and you see lots of crowns coming up through, go ahead and snap some and enjoy them, and then just let the rest go to maturity. So
great. And also another question from Sharon. What do you do about spreading fruit shrubs when you don't want them to spread?
the spread. I see that often in cherries, so like Nanking cherries, or like gooseberries, for example, they'll layer. So they branch out and then they arc and then touch the ground. And the outer reaches of their branches start to where they're in contact with the soil. It's called layering. They'll just start to put down roots and become a whole nother shrub. And so you can pull those. If you see that happening, I either pull them up and I also keep the bottom of my berry shrubs. If they're doing that, I keep it limbed up a bit. So I keep them really tidy. It's hard with plants like gooseberry because they sprawl and flop. They want to do that. That's how they make like a patch or a thicket. That's how blackberries do. Like if you've ever been to Vancouver, that's
Mhm.
how a whole park can get taken over by blackberries because they send out one cane that arcs and reaches down and touches new plant. Arcs, reaches down, touches new plant. And all once that all happens everywhere, you could get stuck in there. We don't have it that bad here, but gooseberries, they tend to be really pickery, so we don't often maintain them. So they have they're like, oh, the humans are ignoring us. And so they take off with it. But you do have to get in there, get some leather gloves on, get some long sleeves, get your loppers. If you can pull them up by the roots, those outer ones, and then follow that limb back to the main plant and just cut it right off so that you're basically creating like a vase shape to your shrub, and then they'll have less likelihood. And also you can top them. Every few years, it's okay to trim back your deciduous shrubs. It keeps them bushier and thicker and more productive with their berries. So after they fruit, after they flower and fruit, anytime between fruiting and when they break dormancy in spring, you can prune them back. It's a fun thing to do in the winter when you're bored. It's the only
Uh,
time I have, so that's usually when I do it. Yeah.
Hilarious. A question about hazelnuts. Do they grow well here? I've heard that they do best near Edmonton in the north.
Yeah, hazelnuts are awesome. They have a hard time in the Chinooks, I've noticed. So you can grow them here, but I don't think they'll be like what you see out in BC where they're like small trees. Um, you can definitely try them though. We have some that are hardy, and I would put them in an area of your property where you get the best snow coverage. So you want to keep them dormant through the full year, and that's almost impossible if we're getting repeated Chinooks or a mild winter. But if you can keep them someplace where it's easy to pile snow and have them, and like I would mulch them heavily, pile snow, pile snow, pile snow until they're big enough that they seem like they're on their own, till they're like up to your waist or so. And then you can kind of stop babying them. I wouldn't cover them with burlap or a structure. I would just use what Mother Nature gives you. Just mulch around the base, um, make a little bit of a depression at the stem so that you're not creating a constant spot of moisture against the trunk, but all the way around like the root zone area above that on the ground. Mulch it really thick and then pile snow. Yeah. And cross your fingers. Should be okay though. We do have native hardy hazelnuts. So
Yeah.
could give them a try.
Question about haskap bushes. What variety do you grow, and do you need two different varieties to cross-pollinate?
Yes, haskaps do need a cross pollinator. I haven't been out into the garden centers to look particularly at haskaps, but somebody was telling me the other day they think that there's a breed now where like the breeders have made them self-pollinating. Not totally sure about that. It to be safe. I really love the old school varieties. So Haskaps came about from the University of Saskatchewan, Bob Boers, and their breeding program there. They worked really closely with folks in Siberia to get Haskaps or honeyberries. That's a more marketable term for them here. And so they are a member of the honeysuckle family, which is quite hardy here. And if it can grow in Siberia, that's like when you look at latitude lines on the globe, we're pretty Siberia like. Like you follow us around and we go over towards Siberia, same latitude, similar. And so they grow really great honeyberries over there. So the ones that I really like, and again, do you want a big one? Do you have a big space, like 8 feet by 8 feet, or do you want them smaller because you're going to put them in a more sort of manicured landscape area? I really like two that are smaller. They're called Tundra and Borealis. They just make nice compact bushes that I've never needed to prune. They're like 4 feet wide by 4 feet tall, ever. They never get much bigger than that. And then they make berries that are the size of the end of my thumb, and they are amazing. They're delicious, and they're always super high producers. So Tundra Borealis, I know Aurora is another good one. I think I've got 7 haskaps on my property, and that's 3 different varieties. And I always have a few freezer bags full of berries, and then whatever we eat fresh. And then the baby robins get the rest. So yeah, they're all well fed.
Excellent. Also, a question about red aphids. Sharon's saying that I have red aphids on my Heliopsis plant every late summer, and there are never any ladybugs to take care of them. Same with her honeysuckle vine.
Mm.
So
You know what? I
any,
get those on my hollyhocks. I'm not sure if they're the exact same type of aphid, but they're
yes.
rust colored, and if I happen to brush against them or squish them, it looks kind of like grasshopper, like tobacco juice, used to call it, or like blood, kind of like old dried blood. Um, that is so what I do for aphids, and you can try your sprays. Definitely get out your arsenal of natural sprays. I'm not a big proponent of anything synthetic. I just find it's too much of an interjection in natural cycles. Um, Maybe the ladybugs will find you eventually. Maybe it looks more like predatory wasps or songbirds. There's a lot of animals that eat soft-bodied insects. We just need to encourage them more into our spaces. Even ground beetles, the larvae of a lot of plants can eat a lot of these soft-bodied insects. So give a little space to increase that habitat. Find out what eats aphids and encourage, like, find out what their favorite food is aside from aphids, or what their favorite habitat might be. Don't clean up your garden too quickly. Um, and I guess I would say a fast jet of water. Like if you can, I just take my hose on the strongest setting and I just blast the plants. Even sometimes kind of holding, like if you can put your hand behind the heliopsis and just spray it and try and get under the leaves and all around where the aphids hide, that if they can get knocked to the ground, they'll get eaten by something for sure. Um,
Mhm.
that usually works well for me. I've found when I have clients that get out the big guns and they start spraying pesticides, it usually doesn't play out well. They're killing a lot of stuff that does more good than not, and they're just interrupting cycles, natural cycles that usually do find balance over time. You just have to be patient.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a question about Miracle Grow soil. What is your opinion on the Miracle Grow soil?
It costs too much. I'm a real thrifty gal. I like to make my own home compost, and that's what I use for pretty much everything, like my annual planters, I fertilize all my perennial foods and my perennial plants, my woody shrubs, my vegetable beds get all that. So I've found it took me a number of years, like 7, 8 years before I started making enough soil out of my compost. That's not for everybody. Not all of us have the space or resources to do that. But I make about a cubic yard every year just from my kitchen scraps and dried leaves on top. And then I turn it once and then I use that. What I noticed, there's a lot of bagged soils or imported soils. And by imported, I mean just not from your own property that will have hitchhikers in them. Miracle Grow soil could be okay for seedlings. Fungus gnats are not great for seedlings, however. Um, yeah, I guess if I were to buy potting soil, I usually just get like a generic brand potting soil, like ProMix. I don't really get too fancy with it. And then if I want to fertilize my seedling soil, I'll use worm castings. I find they're really safe and they often don't have a lot of like other insects involved or fungal issues. Worm castings are also like a cool way to support local worm composters who sell their stuff at either independent garden centers or at different gardening markets like CD Saturday or the hippie plant sale. Maybe we can even find them at like plant exchanges or online. Yeah, so I wouldn't mess around too much with like a lot of name brand stuff. I mean, ProMix is and maybe sea soil if you can't get your hands on your own high quality aged compost. Sea soil is another good one. It's made in Canada and it's pretty legit as far as aged compost goes. I've had great results with it when I needed to top up different areas. Yeah, so not it's weird. I'm always like, I'm not trying to support or not support other brands, but in the end, I guess I kind of am. I don't need stuff that's pumped full of synthetic fertilizers. I just feed it natural stuff that won't burn things like worm poop. Worm castings are great. I love them.
Yep, I have my own vermicomposting bin. I've had one for at least 10 years before it was the rage.
Nice.
Yes, it was our legacy gift to my kids' play school back in the day. So that, anyways,
Nice.
but yes, warm composting, vermicomposting, that's Fantastic. Sharon has
Keep it up.
also put in there, Annalita in Edmonton is making great products. So there are soil solutions. And then if you're looking for also soil amendments, there's Doug here, Doug, as well as Prairie Pellets. They make great soil amendments as well. And then, yes, I don't know if we want to open the discussion about creeping bellflower.
It's a good analogy though. When we leave things
Yeah.
uncontrolled, it can get just that uncontrolled. When we think we're just as good as Mother Nature, that's usually when we get schooled pretty good. So we have to keep our egos in check as human gardeners. We are again back to that pre-permaculture time where we were tending the gifts we were given. We apply our intelligence to some future planning and some tinkering here and there, but ultimately some things are not going to work out or some things are going to get out of control, and we always have to take responsibility. And usually the lower the input, the better for the whole system. At least that's what I've found. So we don't need to go in with guns ablazing. Or, I know people that have dug out their entire gardens 3 feet down, like down to their gas lines to get rid of creeping bellflower. And they brought in all new soil. And the next year they had creeping bellflower. So you can dump chemicals, you can cancel your gym membership and spend a ton of money, and still these things have been introduced and they're here, some of them to stay, or some of them are passing through. So we don't have to take everything personally, and we can come up with some alternative plans, I guess, like learn about hot composting and get so much satisfaction from throwing a whole pile of creeping bellflower into a compost pile and killing it and turning it into like beneficial, amazing soil. There's lots of that happening around the city. It's great. So,
Yes.
or eat it.
Um,
You can eat that stuff.
yes. So just one last question maybe before we go. Your opinion about biochar.
Biochar is a fun product to use. You have to kind of protect yourself because it's usually really dusty. Biochar, as far as I understand it from the research I've done and the practice that I've used it in my own gardening, is that it increases habitat in the soil for microorganisms that will benefit your soil health. So really, you're creating surface area for them to hide out and hang out and eat and rest in. So a little goes a long way. I love that you can get it locally. It's an ancient practice as well. So it's neat to see some of these ancient things coming back around. It just shows that we really do respect our ancestors. But yeah, use it sparingly. Do your research on what it's for and how much you need. That whole thing of like more is better, that's not necessarily the case with things like biochar. And then again, protect yourself. Just don't breathe it in. It's better in the compost pile than your lungs or right into your garden soil. But I've always had the best success putting it in my compost. It just seems like that's where the microorganisms are. So we'll put it in there and then it'll make its way into my garden when the compost goes that way. Yeah,
Excellent.
such
Thank
great
you.
questions.
Yes. And we have reached the end of our time. So thank you so much, Joanna. This was a
Thanks,
great
Ellie.
way to spend a rainy evening. If you're interested in more seed to table classes, please check out our website on calhort.org on our What's Happening page. We hope to see everyone either in person or online at our next talk. Thank you again, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Laura. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night. Happy gardening.
Happy gardening.